Good afternoon. It's a small group, but that's okay. We'll keep it informal. I'm going to have to move that away. You guys can hear me okay, right? Yeah, so I think my name is George Parmenter, as Michelle noted. I support Hannaford in their health and sustainability work. She alluded to a larger company. I actually work for Hannaford's parent company in the U.S., just the way we're organized. If you guys have questions about that, we can talk about it. But I have been working in the role in sustainability for a little over a decade, and I've seen some really incredible transformations in how businesses view the topic of sustainability. And for me, I think we've reached a tipping point, or nearly a tipping point, on a bunch of different topics. I'm really delighted to be here with you today, with all of you, to share some insights into how Hannaford is managing our approach to climate and energy issues. So you'll notice the greater than groceries tagline on this slide, and that's the way we've chosen to talk about our sustainability work, both internally and externally. The idea being that when Hannaford works together with our stakeholders and our customers on issues that impact us all in the communities we serve, we can transcend our core business, and together we become greater than groceries. That's kind of how that goes. Which button am I pushing? The top one?
The right now.
Right one. Perfect. So you guys may know our brand. Hannaford Supermarkets operates in we operate 185 supermarkets in the Northeast. We're in Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, and New Hampshire, obviously. In New Hampshire, we operate 36 supermarkets. 29 of those have pharmacies, and we employ about 6,000 Granite Staters. In our supermarkets, we strive to show up offering the best in fresh. This sounds a little commercially, and I apologize, but I have to do it because it's just a program. We try to show up offering the best in fresh. For us, that's produce, meat, seafood, bakery, and deli. We really want to shine in those departments. And an important part of the Hannaford culture, and this is more pertinent to what we're talking about today, so we are an organization that looks for opportunities to solve issues where we can help in the communities we operate. So we did that in 2014, just hearkening back to kind of some early successes when we announced our first in the nation seafood sustainability program. So in that case, we worked with a third party to assess every seafood item that we sell, whether that is fresh, frozen, or in the canned seafood aisle, to assess those against our very stringent seafood sustainable seafood policy. And that work continues today. Kind of another example of how we have worked, and this is really more pertinent to the topic of energy and climate that we're working on today. In 2009, we opened the most environmentally friendly supermarket in the U.S. It's located in Augusta, Maine. The supermarket was built kind of as a learning laboratory to try a bunch of different things to see what was commercially viable. We tried things like doors on refrigerated cases. We installed solar arrays. We did geothermal, LED lighting. We designed and built advanced refrigeration systems, and also brought more natural light into the building to help with illumination. This store earned a LEED Platinum certification. It is the only LEED certified building that's a supermarket, full stop. There have been no other supermarkets certified LEED Platinum. So many of the things that we tried in this store, we've been able to deploy into other supermarkets in our standard format. Okay, so we're going to get, you got to bear with me here. So, all right, so I want to zoom forward to our current health and sustainability strategy. Talked a bit about our history. So where we are now, and I want to talk a little bit about the why. Why activities like conserving energy, reducing our greenhouse gas, and adopting renewable energy is important to us as an organization. So none of this is new news, but it's also, none of it is good news. So we'll get through it as quickly as we can, but it's important. So since 1980, each decade since 1980, the planet has gotten warmer. And since 2015, we have posted the 7 warmest years. So it's not 7 in a row, but the last 7 have all broken records. And if nothing changes, we're on track to reach a global temperature increase of 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, very likely resulting in the worst climate worst case climate scenarios. So we're actually seeing some of that today with floods, droughts, wildfires, megastorms, and rising seas. All of these things impacting millions of people right across the globe, and in many cases, the most vulnerable populations right across the globe. Collectively, we emit 51 billion tons of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere annually. 51 billion tons annually. It has to be zero if we're going to get where we need to get, right? So this is my personal statement, not on behalf of Hannaford, but I think we're in the midst of a climate crisis. That's my earnest belief. So what are we doing about it? So our parent company has committed to be a net zero carbon business by 2040, and that's important. To be 2040 sounds like a long time into the future, I know that, but once you look at what has to happen in our business to make that happen, you'll see that there are a lot of activities that have really long tails, plus it really impressed upon us that the necessity to act decisively and quickly is a necessity, it's not optional. So on the other side of the graph here is our climate impact footprint. So 50% of our climate impact comes from stuff we plug in stores. So energy we use in stores. This is all, you guys know about scope 1 and 2. So this is all stuff that's in our direct control as a company. So 50% of our climate impact comes from energy use, energy consumption. 33% comes from refrigeration. I'll talk a bit about that. And then 10% from transport. And I wanted to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail just so you can understand what's going on there, like why is that, and what are some of the challenges with those things. So I picked refrigeration first. Do you guys know about GWP, global warming potential? So that's a term you're familiar with. So refrigeration gases can have extremely impactful high GWPs or fairly low GWPs, and Turner's going to talk a bit about that also. But so the impact of refrigeration systems isn't from the electricity to turn them on and run them. It's more from the leaking of gas into the atmosphere, and when those gases have particularly high GWPs, that impact can be thousands of times worse than the same unit in carbon, and that's bad. That's something we have to pay a lot of attention to. So we also want to talk a bit about the size of the refrigeration systems in our stores. They're quite large. They're massive, and the fact that they're going to leak is just a fact of the matter of having them. So that's refrigeration, and I can tell you a little bit about how we plan to address that. So carbon emissions from transport, 10%. It seems small because you can't get on 95 or 101 without seeing a Hannaford truck, right? They're everywhere. But 10% seems small, but if you look at the numbers comparatively, it's still a big number. And there is still a long way to go in technology before we can completely move away from diesel trucks to move our products around. So we'll talk more about that also. So energy consumption, really that's the reason where I'm here today, is to talk to you about a renewable power commitment. And this is kind of how we're planning to approach all of that stuff, and I'll take each in turn. So with respect to refrigeration, the idea is to design the higher GWP refrigerations out of our systems to go to lower GWP. And there's a lot of technological advances happening now to move refrigeration gases to the single number GWPs, which is really where we need to be. And the thing about that, though, is it's not just as simple as taking the old gas out and putting new gas in. These systems are integral to the building envelope. They're built into the building. Lots of elements of those systems have to change. So really what we're talking about is disassembling a system and putting a new system in. So new stores, not such a big deal. We can start with the right gases, but existing stores, it's a long process, which makes that 2040 closer in time than we feel is comfortable, and we're working on this as quickly as we can, but it really has to be designed around when we go to do major remodels in stores. Low carbon heating is another element of the store. So we're in the Northeast. We heat a lot of our stores with natural gas, propane, and in some case, heating oil. If we're going to be a net carbon zero business, we can no longer do that. We also have a lot of appliances in our stores, like chicken rotisserie. Those are gas also. So all of those things have to change to electrification for us to meet that goal. So again, it's a very long-term thing. Transportation, just really quickly, I don't know if you guys got out and drove the Teslas today, but it's really cool, and we're really excited about the opportunities to move to either hydrogen or electrical in our trucking fleet, but we are nowhere near being able to do that. The infrastructure doesn't exist for even distributing, in some cases, the hydrogen to fuel trucks, and then the range is a problem. So there are a lot of hurdles to overcome, and really relying on technology moving fast to help us with that. And we're trying some experiments, but nothing that's going to benefit us very soon. In our business, we've adopted a carbon, the way we approve capital now has built in disincentives to high carbon expenditures and incentives for low carbon expenditures. And it's kind of a simple thing to do, and it's very impactful because now projects that would have been approved 2 years ago don't get approved, and they have to be adjusted to fit a low carbon environment. Building efficient stores is also really important. We have to continue to do that. We have to continue energy efficiency. We have to continue to do LED lights and continue to putting doors on cases. I don't know if you guys shop our stores, but you'll notice a lot of the refrigerated cases have doors. By simply putting a door on a refrigerated case, you can cut the energy required to run that case by 60 or 70%. It's pretty incredible. Hands down, bang for energy efficiency buck, you can't beat it. So expect to see more doors on more cases. We're really trying to push the envelope to see where consumers start pushing back. So that's an ongoing process there. And then finally, we get to renewable energy. So Hannaford's committed to have 100% of the energy or the electricity in our stores from renewable energy by 2024. Some of that is just kind of the luck of being located where we're located. So just a really quick flyover why that's important to us. 5 out of 5 of the states we operate in either have gubernatorial executive targets for greenhouse gas reductions or legislative greenhouse gas reduction targets. So we know our stakeholders care about it. Obviously, we want to maintain our position as a sustainability leader. If we're not addressing this issue, we really have no credibility in any other issue. For our company, climate action is a top priority. And the idea of moving to 100% renewable energy is an important step toward that net zero carbon. We have to do that first and then move all the other stuff that's not electrical to electrical, and then work on those big, gnarly issues of refrigeration and transportation. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're partnering with multiple community solar projects, 32 actually across Maine, Maine, New York, and Massachusetts. Those projects are providing 129 megawatts of solar capacity. These projects are already providing renewable energy to about 30% of our stores, give or take, and we'll continue to work on getting these projects activated and online, and that will allow us to click up the scale toward 100%. Another side benefit of these projects is because Hannaford signs on as a long-term partner in these projects, taking the majority of committing to take the majority of the power for 20 years, it becomes easier for the developers of these projects to get financed and built. And in New York and Massachusetts, there's an additional benefit where parts of these community solar farms have been carved off for residential users, where in Massachusetts and New York, we have 6,000 residential customers benefiting from these these projects being in place. These are great projects. Changes in legislation in those states really are driving our activity in those states. You can see there are some economic and other environmental impacts to these projects, but we're really high on community solar as a way to move forward. We tried rooftop solar. We have rooftop solar on a number of stores. The stores where we have rooftop solar, maybe on a really good year might cover 20% of the energy in that store. So it wasn't going to be a solution for us in the long run. So I thought about Michelle's suggestion, and kind of by way of kind of takeaways that we learned, I think the really key things are know your business, understand where you can have an impact, reflecting back on Hannaford. So we have this commitment to be net carbon zero by 2040. It's going to take a significant effort. We know that. In some cases, we don't even know how we're going to get there. But while we're working on this, we have to continue to build efficient stores. That's a priority for us. And we know that this 100% renewable energy is an important milestone on that. So those floated right to the top for us when we're looking at our business and what's possible for us to do. So then once you find the right action, for us it was identifying that 100% renewable. It's really about getting on with it, right? So I think the key is to find out what works for you and do it. And then in our business, sustainability is very much a business function. It used to be a lot funner when I did it 10 years ago. I didn't make much progress, to be honest, but I could work on whatever I wanted to. Now it's very much a business function. We have a strategy, we have a plan, we have goals we're supposed to meet every quarter. If we don't meet those goals, we got to figure out how to remediate on that. So I think that's another takeaway that I would share. An important thing is just to build this into your organizations and make it part of the way you do business. I think in the future, businesses that don't address this stuff, will just be punished for it. So I think, so that's what I've got, Michelle. I don't know. Thank you.
Turner, looking forward to hearing about all that filtering is doing.
Timer running up here. How did I do?
Let's see, it's the right-hand one?
Right now.
Right arrow. Hi, my name is Turner Hansel. I'm the president at Filtrine. Can you hear me now? President of Filtrine. We're over in Keene, New Hampshire. And we've just a little bit of, I'm going to take you on a little bit of the journey of Filtrine, because you probably have never heard of it. And but we're a 121-year-old company, started in 1901 down in Brooklyn. And we were making filter elements, believe it or not, at that point, and for filtering of water, for drinking water. And New York City was our prime target. Shortly, well, maybe, let's see, about 40 years later, we moved to New Jersey and continued manufacturing there. That's where we brought in chillers. And I'll explain a little bit more about what we do with chillers as we go along here. But we were there until 1972 or 71. We moved to Harrisville, New Hampshire. And I don't know if anybody knows where that is, but it's right out near Dublin in the Monadnock region. And we moved into an old woolen mill. And one of the features of this woolen mill was it had a stream running through it, which they used to run all their machinery basically off of the turbines, not necessarily turbines, but for 200 years they were running off wheels that ran the leather bands that went around the machines that made wool, essentially. So back in the 70s, shortly after we moved to Harrisville, Filtrine decided they wanted to cut their energy cost. And found a turbine in upstate New York, installed it, put in the penstock. So we've been making, back then, we started to be really concerned about our energy consumption. And we got to the point where we were actually, the dams, back then, the control of the dams was a big issue because you had to have water to run that turbine. And there were 4 lakes or so above the that fed our penstock, and each one of those had to be controlled by dams. So fast forward, we have a long history in trying to cut our energy consumption. But shortly, let's see, about 1999, we moved to Keene. Okay, it was a much bigger building. It was a single level building, which was a real blessing compared to what we were in. A little bit about what we do. We manufacture, and we're strictly in manufacturing. We manufacture drinking water systems. We still are in that business, filtering and chilling of drinking water and making the drinking fountains, which are found in the finest buildings in the world. Primarily the number one architects in the world specify Filtrine for their drinking fountains. Made of bronze, made of stainless, made of marble, made of corian, all that's done at our factory. The other side of the business is we manufacture water chillers, and they're all different sizes. And most of your MRIs here in New Hampshire are cooled by Filtrine chillers. MRIs need cooling all the time, 24/7. Otherwise, they will literally melt if it's not cooled. So that's a big business for us. And it's kept us going through the pandemic because it's an essential business. But as you can see, we have a lot of different kinds of manufacturing, from making a really fine, architecturally pleasing drinking fountain to making a chiller that's from here to that wall. Okay, that involves welding, that involves a lot of sheet metal work, that involves plumbing and refrigeration. So it's a lot of different categories that we would hit in trying to save energy. So how did we do this? As far as the plan, so I point it there. Which way do I go? Oh, it's changing it there? Well, I could have them operated. If it works there, then just.
Your chillers do the same as everyone else?
Yep. Yeah, it's all pretty much low pressure refrigerants. Low pressure refrigerants. So you all set? All right, so first of all, our goal, because we wanted to figure out, okay, we need to save energy to going forward. That was one of our missions. As you can see, Filtrine is committed to building the highest quality products in the most environmentally sustainable manner. How do we do that? Well, we came up with a plan. And the first step was to have an analysis done on how we can save our energy. This is we went to Antioch University and said, went to graduate students, and they said, we'd love to do this project and figure out how to make it so that your carbon footprint is smaller. So what they did is they basically did two different analyses. One tracking Filtrine's operational stability analysis that primarily tracks the impacts associated with our direct operations, and not necessarily a complete analysis, a full life cycle analysis. So the first analysis, which is the top one, which is, I know, hard because you can't read it, but they went and you've got, I better read it over here. Okay. The inputs on the ecological footprint was the inputs were electricity, metals, water, heat, compressed gases. That's out of our building, and waste output with landfill and recycling. So that was how and these were all done in their analysis based on hectares. And they were using a study, an analysis that was created by, I don't know who Herzig and Chemetz are, but that was a study that they used. These are graduate students, so they had to make it look that way. And starting in 2012, which is what we're seeing over here, okay, and this is 2020, I think it is. 2020, how we were able to show reductions in our footprint by recycling, by certain gases that we were using for refrigerants, our heat, and I'll get into how we reduce these as we go along. Our water consumption was cut quite a bit. The second part of this is your greenhouse gas footprint analysis, which was done in metric tons per year. So again, the direct emissions in this case were electricity, heat, compressed gases, metals, because we use a lot of metals, landfill wastes, and HFCs for refrigerants. And again, this one shows a very steep decline, and I'll explain how that happens. Let's see here. So first thing is that step 2 in this journey is we installed 2-inch insulation on the roof, and a solar array in 2009 to heat the water in our test room. Every single one of our chillers is tested, so that we test it based on what the application that this chiller is going to be used for, to know that it will actually meet the heat load of the application. So we have to hit it with some hot water in order to cool it down, because we're always in a cooling water. It's a water chiller, it's not a water heater. So we have a big tank that we keep all of our testing water in, and that's heated through solar. Okay, so we don't need to rely on external electricity for keeping that at the right temperature. Replaced all of our LEDs. Okay, spent a fair amount on replacing the lights in the building as well as outside in the parking area. And we had to put in a recirculating system on that, so we don't test the chiller and have the water going down the drain. Okay, it goes back into your tank. So we're not using up water as we're testing the equipment. In 2020, you're talking about rooftop solar. We did that. It's about 2 acres worth of panels, 2,234 solar panels. The building is 110,000 square feet, and it generates over 900 megawatt hours of solar electricity per year. This basically, we can run the entire building with all the welding, with all the sheet metal work on the solar panels during the day. Obviously at night, that's not the case, but during the day, we are completely off the grid as far as using power from POC. And that's really what we wanted to achieve, as far as getting it so that meter can actually be sold, the excess power be sold back to POC. And so we are at that point with this. And we have I'll show you, I don't know when that graph is. Might be next, I'm not sure. So here's the Filtrine expanded solar array. We did that first set of panels to heat the water. That was in 2009. This other one was 2020. And so now, we offset 468 tons of carbon pollution annually, which is equivalent of taking 90 cars off the road, or 500 acres of sequestered carbon. And that's impressive. I mean, that's with panels and with lights, okay? The next thing, so here's that graph I was referring to. This is a snapshot. In this case, this is a live solar energy. You can look this. We just bring this up on our screen any day and see what kind of juice we're producing at any time. Obviously, at night and during the winter, it's going to be very low. But you can see the equivalence, and so the lifetime of this one was for power was 2.42 gigawatt hours of power. That's impressive. That's in 2 years. Okay. The other thing we did is we got ourselves completely, pretty much. We have an oil furnace that uses heating oil, but we put in a wood burning stove through Frawling, who was out in the other room. I mistakenly have Peterborough in there. They're based in Keene now. But they put in a 1 million BTU per hour precision wood draught. And they make these chips. So the chips are sourced locally. Okay. And we have a big silo that is what you would see on a farm in the Midwest for their corn. It looks like we have a silo of corn out there. It's actually got wood chips in it. And so that takes us, pretty much so that we don't have to burn any oil, for most of the year. There are times, obviously, you need it when it gets really cold, but it's very, very comfortable in the building. So our annual oil has gone in, from $62,000 a year. We cut it in half in 2017, and that's gone on beyond that. With today's prices, that's a big deal. So with that kind of payoff, it'll take 6 years to pay off that boiler, the wood boiler. So you can see that this journey started back in the 70s when we put in a turbine for water. And these are things that they're all little steps, but they really add up when you get done. And we're not done yet. So you can see the kind of expenses that we had. Here's your lighting upgrade was $117,000, but we had a rebate on that of $33,000. And you can see all of them all the way down. The Revision Energy is the one that did the solar installation, and Frawling did the furnace. So you can see that ultimately, you've got the Hampshire rebates at $174. Some of these are not available anymore, I know, but we took advantage of it at the time, and maybe there'll be some coming back. But if you own a company or if you're involved with a company like this, these are things to look for if you're looking to move in this direction. And you wouldn't be here, I don't think, if you weren't. So, but you got a net cost of about just under $2 million at the end. But that will, and you have your federal credits. But we're basically living off the grid for most of the time. So we've recently put in a charger station. We only have one, but that'll expand. So where do we go from here? We're not done yet, as I mentioned earlier. George was talking about GWP. I think we're behind a lot of other countries when it comes to that. And we can learn from them, particularly Europe. And, there's some refrigerants that you don't even think of as refrigerants that would get us a long way. I think some regulations have to change as far as, like, for example, propane. Propane is a perfectly good refrigerant, but we're limited in how big a system we can make with propane. It's very small, so it'd be great for, very small, like a refrigerator or something like that. But it wouldn't be good for a walk-in cooler, okay? Or some of our bigger chillers. We can't do it because regulations don't allow us to. It's got to be under a certain size as far as the compressor size, basically. But we're going to continue to look in that direction because I think that's our next area, is in our company. We're not looking. We're doing a lot with recycling. Okay, that to lower that footprint. But it hasn't stopped. So we've been doing it since the 70s, and we're going to continue to work down this road. But that's just a little company like Filtrine. We're only about 75 people. Okay, so it's anybody can do this even if they're only 10 people. There's things that you can do to cut your energy consumption. Yes. The 2020, well, we got, let me go back. This is the one here. The only one we got was the federal tax credit on it. Okay. There are other rebates that we got, but we didn't get any grants. I don't think we got any grants, did we, Pete? On the wood burner. The wood burner we did, but not on the solar. But those are good things to keep an eye out for, because they hope, I don't know what's coming out in this new, Inflation Reduction Act or whatever it is, and whether that's going to have anything like that in it or not, I have no idea.
Right now, I think it's but I think it's going to take a couple of years for both
Mm-hmm. Right. But you can see it can happen. It's this is a real life story, and we're very, very pleased with the way it's working. We're warm in the winter, and and we're cool in the summer. As far as now, out in the shop, they won't say that because that's not air conditioned, but they get mad at me because I don't put air conditioning out there. But in the regular office, it's fine. Anything else? Yes. Well, there's your oil. Okay. So it went from here to here, and that was when oil was cheap compared to today. And also, this shows you how much we're not paying PUC. Okay, this is sitting on our roof, so we're not. The meter isn't spinning as far as what we have to pay the utility company. We actually have it go the other way, sell it back to them.
Well, that's something I would mention too. Clean Energy New Hampshire and NHS started a lot of work trying to advocate for more policies that support like increasing net metering caps and more rebates for these important projects that everyone is doing. So that's something where businesses, it's great if you can get involved and say, we as a business support this sort of
right, and
policy. I think that's, New Hampshire is falling way behind our neighboring states. We saw Georgia's traffic doing a lot more around us than we can do here in New Hampshire, and that's because we don't have So it's an important message in ways in your voice matters when you speak up and say that these projects are important to the business.
Right, but that work that journey you just went through earned Filtrine to be recognized during the New Hampshire Energy Week as the Business Energy Champion for 2021. We were very proud of that.
Well, thank you very much. And now I'm excited to bring Robin and Kat up. So I love when we have projects that have to do with young people in our state. We work a lot with UNH. They have a great sustainability institute that they have wonderful sustainability fellows that come out of. I know George, you can use some of the fellows as well, and Turner Milton and so I think we are very lucky to have the type of expertise and guidance that we can provide out of our local universities. And so, with Hypertherm leading the way, I'm going to let them share their carbon project, the Hypertherm project.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll give a brief introduction, and then Catherine and I together will present. So my name is Robin Tindall. I'm from Hypertherm. For those of you who don't know, Hypertherm is located up in the Upper Valley in the Hanover and Lebanon region of New Hampshire. We have 12 facilities there. We employ about 2,000 people, and we're a global manufacturer of industrial cutting solutions. So most of you probably do not own our products. The people who own our products are other businesses that you've probably heard of. John Deere, for example, uses our products to make their tractors. Companies that make cars, pipelines, structural steel, they all use our equipment to make their products. Masks that we're all too familiar with these days, they use our water jet cutting equipment to make masks. So my title is Environmental Stewardship Team Leader. This summer, we scoped an internship project, and we were lucky enough to be matched with Catherine from UNH and the UNH Sustainability Institute to act as our fellow for the summer in researching this project. So I will hand it over to Catherine now, and she can introduce herself and go through our first few slides. I figured we would switch over here because you might not be able to hear me, even though I think I'm pretty good at projecting. So my name's Kat Taylor, or Catherine, if you would rather. And last summer, as Robin mentioned, I worked with Hypertherm as a UNH Sustainability Fellow. It was a great experience, and that was the summer after I earned my bachelor's in environmental economics at UNH. I am now a grad student pursuing my master's in environmental economics at UNH, so I'm very lucky to be able to continue my studies at such a great university. So we're just going to start off with this really amazing quote from the Harvard Business Review, kind of emphasizing the importance of thinking about carbon when you're making business decisions. So this quote says, "The price of carbon may be zero in many places today, but it is unlikely to remain zero for long. That means that many companies have hidden liabilities on their books." So that refers to the cost to society that carbon may impose, and it also can be the cost to companies as well that isn't really considered in monetary terms right now, because carbon is kind of a abstract, superfluous thing where we put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and we measure it in tons or in global warming potential, and that's kind of hard to understand when you're thinking about typical business decisions like money. So, internal carbon pricing wants to solve this problem. It wants to make it easier for businesses to consider carbon alongside other more traditional financial measures when they're making decisions. So an internal carbon pricing scheme or process is based on the concept of cap and trade, which you've probably heard of. New England has RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which imposes cap and trade on carbon emissions from energy producers. And instead of having government, through a regulatory sense, place a carbon price on a business, an internal carbon price allows a business to put a price on themselves. And they can choose how they want to meet their goals in respect to this price. So it's very efficient.
A carbon price is the dollar value placed on 1 ton of carbon emissions. And companies can impose their own carbon price they choose the price, they choose how to implement the price, and they also, which we're going to talk about some different methods of implementation later in the presentation, and they also choose how they want to reduce their carbon emissions. So this is really good for a lot of companies because, especially a company like Hypertherm, there isn't really a blueprint for internal carbon pricing, and it really needs to be tailored to the individual business's needs, rather than maybe a sweeping government regulation might ignore the intricacies involved in business. So there are 3 ways you can implement ICP in your business. You can have a carbon shadow price. This one is the most common. Most businesses have already implemented this who have chose to implement ICP. So this is a theoretical price applied to decision making. So like Hypertherm has done, it can be applied in capital expenditure decisions. It can also be applied in investment decisions or just general strategy and business management. It's a theoretical price, so no money is actually exchanged hands, but it kind of creates a separate category or a separate column on your expenses that would show what would happen if you did have to pay a carbon price. And then you could have a carbon fee or a carbon tax. So this is a real dollar amount. So you assign a carbon fee or tax to individual business units. This can be teams, this can be buildings or separate manufacturing factories. And this will allow for a lot of incentives for the individual teams. Maybe they're competing with each other, or maybe they have to meet certain goals. They're going to see an internal carbon fee or tax actually on their budgets taken out of the money that they get, the money that they earn for a quarter or a year. So this will incentivize them to take more carbon reducing effective measures because it really affects their bottom line with the internal carbon fee. Most of the time, the money that's collected from teams, it can either be redistributed back to the teams based on merit, or the company, such as what Microsoft does, is they can funnel it into a wider fund used specifically for carbon reduction projects. And then most companies have a hybrid of these 2 methods. Most of the time, you can have a shadow price and then implement a carbon fee or tax later, and that's always a really great idea because you kind of get the best of both worlds, both benefits from these different methods. So we all know there is a problem going on. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all interested in energy solutions for New Hampshire. Right now, with the most recent IPCC report, so we have not made the progress that we need to keep the planet below the temperature that we need to make sure things can function on Earth normally as we have always liked it to be. We really need immediate and steep reductions to avoid the worst case scenarios that science is predicting right now. Like we said, many countries and companies are going for net zero because we really need to stop producing any emissions to be able to undo all the damage we've done in the past and prevent issues we're having now from getting worse. Climate risks include recent hurricanes we've had have been more severe, wildfires, more intense precipitation events, and sea level rise is also a big deal, especially for us who love to visit the coasts. Declines in human health, crop yields, a bunch of stuff that's really sad and depressing to talk about, but is in our immediate future if we don't do something now. So there's been a lot of call to action in the private sector. As we've seen, there's been a lot of stagnation, especially in the United States, on regulations and policies to help combat climate change. But with the private sector, we've also seen some amazing innovations in companies who are really called to find amazing new ways to deal with carbon that maybe government would not have thought of before.
So just a quick little step backwards. Hypertherm has been on the journey of reducing the environmental impact of everything we do for over 13 years. So this is certainly not the first thing that we're doing. And I'm not here to say either that we're necessarily doing it in the right order. There could also be a case to be made for someone who's just starting out to consider something like carbon pricing. We're considering it quite a way into our journey. We had a really robust set of environmental goals for 20 2020. We achieved mixed results on those, but one of our big wins was around energy efficiency. We took the normalized energy efficiency down, or I should say up 16% from 2010 to 2020, saving us $2.5 million in avoided energy costs. So those were really some big early wins that served to get a lot of people engaged and a lot of people on board amongst our 2,000 global associates. So certainly internal awareness and incentives have already been pretty strong. We have a lot of people bought in. We have a lot of internal certification programs, and we measure everything. So we are down to less than 1% to landfill for our waste streams, and we've remained there since January of 2020. So we measure our waste streams, we measure our energy, our water use. We have metering that breaks it down to team, building, floor, section, and manufacturing cell. It was a good time for us to bring in carbon pricing because it's that much more tangible, as Kat was saying, right? Even envisioning 10,000 gallons of water a day, a little bit hard to envision. Certainly tons of carbon are really hard to envision and how much of an impact we're making. But when someone can make a decision and have an incentive based on a dollar amount that's translated from that carbon, it can make a big difference. So those kind of meet those first two company goals, increased incentives. We also see ourselves as a leader in terms of climate and emission reductions, but we need to stay being a leader. We've just set a 2030 goal for Scope 1 and Scope 2 net zero, so meaning our own electricity and our own operations. So this can really fit into that in terms of driving different business units and their decisions to choose the lower carbon alternative. So other benefits, regulations are probably coming. We're a global company, so we often are dealing with regulations in this space that are happening in Europe or even in China before they happen in the US. So certainly we want to be in the driver's seat and take a proactive approach. No one enjoys learning about a regulation and that compliance with that regulation is necessary in 6 months if you have to redesign your products or your operations. So if we can be in the driver's seat, react to those things proactively instead of reactively, that's going to be a big win. It's useful to have a way to account for risk, right? Risk is pretty hard to quantify. It's abstract, and if we can bring it into a dollar value, that would highlight, for example, if we're choosing between two suppliers and we can put a carbon price on those two different components, that highlights a risk because carbon brings the risk forward, or carbon pricing brings the risk forward and puts it into a tangible, understandable metric for us. We want to drive innovation. We consider ourselves an innovative company. And again, having a metric that's dollar-based as opposed to just decarbonize our product, lightweight our product, increase the percent efficiency of our product. We do all of those things, but this allows us to compare different products that might have different attributes and different metrics, all with one bottom line metric. Brand reputation is another big one for us. Again, we consider ourselves leaders in New Hampshire, in the US, and we want to kind of stay on the edge, and we feel that carbon pricing is something that can push us to do even better. This is you.
So this summer, I did a lot of my research on the growth of internal carbon pricing and how it's implemented across the world. So this is not something that is brand new. As you can see, this chart over here starts in 2014. So companies have been implementing internal carbon pricing since 2014. And all of this red are companies that are, in fact, implementing carbon pricing, 853 companies that were surveyed by the Carbon Disclosure Project in 2020, whereas the lined portion of the graph shows about 1,100 are considering doing it in the next 2 years. And this is companies all across all sectors, industrial and industrial service. There was a very large proportion of companies in the gas sector or in very carbon intensive industries that are looking to do internal carbon pricing because they're anticipating a lot of very strong regulation coming down the pipe. Then over here on the left with the map of the world, you can see the bigger the triangle, the more countries, the more companies in that country that are implementing internal carbon pricing. So this is in 2020. And there are 264 companies in the US alone using internal carbon pricing. So it's really spread across the world. We have some really large pockets in the EU, the United States, China, and Japan. But of course, that number is increasing every day, especially as there are more regulatory systems put in place on carbon. I also looked at 3 specific case studies to present to Hypertherm. The first is Mahindra & Mahindra. They are an Indian company. They were the first company in India to produce an electric vehicle, and they are the world's largest manufacturer of tractors. So they implemented both a shadow price and a carbon fee of $10. So $10 is what they charge their individual business units, and there is a little bit of competition between different business units to make sure they have the lowest carbon cost. And the way that they came up with that price is it's their cost, the cost to them of buying carbon reductions. So either they've been a big investor in green energy, actually buying green energy producing plants in India, and also the price of green investments for the company to make sure that they meet their carbon goals. All of these funds directly funnel into green energy investments externally. They've actually found that because of the situation in India, they make more money investing in green energy than they do in their initial business, which is definitely interesting. And their main goal is to reduce carbon intensity per product unit, which is really important, I think, for manufacturing companies who want to find a way to really make sure that they're not only doing carbon reducing measures at their offices, but also in their manufacturing spaces as well. Microsoft, a big name, we're using Microsoft products right now. So they have a carbon fee, and they funnel all of it into an internal carbon fee fund to make sure that they can meet their net zero goals. So they meet their net zero goals by buying offsets, doing reduction projects, green energy on location, and also innovating in tech. They have a $15 carbon price per ton of carbon emissions. They have the goal of being carbon negative by 2030, and they also want to remove all historical carbon they have produced since the inception of the company by 2050. So in that way, they're going to have to use this fund to invest in carbon removal projects that will actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. The technology for that is still forthcoming, but it's a really interesting system. And then Volvo, they have a shadow price. And as you can see, their shadow price is 115, which is very high compared to the other ones. And that's because it is a theoretical price. They implemented it in 2021, and they have the goal of going pretty much all electric. They will not be producing any more cars that run on gasoline alone, and they also want to move from a hybrid system to only producing and selling electric cars by 2030. They call it a sustainability sense check, and because Volvo operates a lot in the EU, they cited regulatory pressures and climate risks to their company as a main reason for implementing an internal carbon price. All right, so deciding on a price. This can be based on a variety of things, and obviously it's very tailored to your business. But as Mahindra did, you can use the cost of carbon offsets to meet your overall carbon neutrality goal as a way to create your carbon price. It can also be the cost of green investments you have a goal for your company to make. It can be the cost of your carbon reduction projects. It can also be around the prevailing industry average, just to make sure that you're on track with everyone else in your industry. That's a good way to make sure you are a climate leader. And you can also do it by thinking about what future regulatory carbon prices might be, so that when the regulations actually go into effect, you're way more prepared as a business because you've already been charging yourself that tax. So you've already changed the way you do business to make sure that any tax or regulation is not going to hurt your bottom line. It's also important to have a price level to drive change internally. You want to make sure if you're doing a carbon tax, when business units look at that on their budget, they are actually incentivized to say, hey, I don't want to be charged this much money every month. Let's install some new lights, or let's change the way that we do things. And generally, the price increases over time in response to the increased risk of climate, but also increasing, inflation costs and the it gets more difficult over time to reduce carbon. Once you've changed your lights to LEDs, once you've done all of these low-hanging fruit, very simple things, it gets more expensive over time to make sure you're still reducing carbon in the long run. So that's a really difficult hurdle for businesses to get over. So over here you can see some benchmarks. So like overall average, you got $25 per ton of CO2. Median for manufacturing industry is 28, and then median carbon fee 18, whereas the shadow price, such as we saw with Volvo is 28, a bit higher.
So our plan going forward, since Catherine has submitted her final report to us at Hypertherm, our first step is always to pilot something. I feel like we can almost always get permission to do anything as long as we call it a pilot, and it gives us the internal permission to fail. So that's just kind of a pro tip for anything in your businesses that might work. So starting with pilots, meaning small, targeted, experimental, maybe one thing different in one department or team than another to see which one works and to kind of iron out things before you go any wider than a team or two. But our first piece that we're going to pilot is about the capital expenditure. So that's the shadow price that Kat talked about. And it's really all about using tools and analyses that we already have and that people are very familiar with, but slotting in there the carbon price. So they might already be looking at a new piece of equipment and they analyze safety, productivity, operations and maintenance costs, serviceability, partnership with the vendor, etc. We're just adding to that matrix a carbon price. And then I have another slide here in a second that kind of compares it to all of the other dollar figures that we're looking at. We then will try out a shadow price as well. It could be that then that shadow price, once it's put into a fund at the end of the year, gets refunded or redistributed to teams that have the most innovative projects or who make the biggest percent savings. It could also be something like an internal revolving loan green fund where we give money to teams that need budget for a green project from that fund. Moving to a carbon fee that's actually collected. Sorry, that's what I just talked about. The shadow price goes with the capital expenditures. That's the one that's not a real price. And we will, of course, take Kat's advice on increasing that over time. Because like she said, the low, easy projects, we've done all those. And so we really are looking at things that are more expensive. We're looking at PPAs. We're looking at on-site solar. We're looking at electrifying our heat through heat pumps. All of those are more expensive than a lot of the easier things we've already done. So just pulling from our CapEx decision matrix, the things we're already used to looking at, of course, material, labor, maintenance and training, and depreciation. And what we're adding in there that are dollar figures directly related to carbon is, of course, direct electricity prices. That's very important and quite obvious. Carbon based on the electrical, but also based on other materials such as refrigerants that we also use. And waste disposal, that's another one that's potentially off topic from the carbon pricing, but something that's easily overlooked, we found in terms of our manufacturing analysis of new equipment is what does that use for chemicals? And then if those chemicals are hazardous waste at the end of the process, we need to make sure that we account for that. The next few slides are just for sharing purposes, different tools that Kat uncovered for investigating carbon pricing. So those are just in there for your reference, assuming this will be sent out, and we can open it up for questions.
I think it's exciting to think about projects that using this type of approach.
I'm curious as to, as we went through the same problem when we started our footprint analysis in 2014, how do you assign a carbon value for all of those processes or things that you're trying to put a price on? For instance, if you were able to reduce your waste metal by a certain number of tons, how do you assign a carbon value to that?
So with something like a waste material that goes out as scrap, the only way I know of doing that is actually using a model that the EPA has already developed. It's called the WARM model. It's not as robust as I'd like in terms of plastics. So we have a lot of waste plastics. We machine super high-tech exotic plastics that have super high functionality, given that we have plasma, which is as hot as the surface of the sun. Plastics need to hold up to that. So the WARM model does not have that level of carbon emissions for plastics like that. They have, polyethylene and HDPE, and they have metals, and they have municipal waste. And so you can look at the amount of waste that you have in these different categories and plug it into the WARM model, and then model out, well, what if you reduced it, or what if you sent it to a different end of life? So sent it to recycling, sent it to landfill, sent it to incineration, and it will give you the carbon output for that.
So are you using the WARM model for other things other than just materials that you reduce waste? And are there other things? You mentioned a whole bunch of different processes, for instance, that you try to assign carbon price to. How do you figure out what the carbon value of that process is?
It would probably be a mix of electricity, and then if there are
So electricity is,
involved,
yes, you can figure it out that way.
yeah, you're adding a bunch of different things together. And then I would assume that maybe the carbon costs of creating the machine could be spread out over its expected life cycle as well, because a lot of obviously very valuable and carbon intensive metals are usually used to make the machines.
So that would be in an ideal world. So right now, say that we make parts that are metal and we wash them to get all the oils off and so that they don't tarnish. So they're these big, huge machines with heating elements, cooling elements, and solvents inside. So that's an example of something that when we want to purchase a new one, we would apply a carbon price. Right now, it's going to be very difficult for us to get that, I think what you're asking, like an embodied carbon, like how much steel and aluminum and plastics are in that machine. So we haven't gotten to that level yet, and I don't know that we will. Instead, what we're doing is all of those other line items. So they might have vastly different energy profiles. They might have vastly different materials, like what the solvent that's used. We talked about global warming potential. So that's going to be different. Even productivity, how much energy does it use for a certain batch of parts? And then hazardous waste from those materials as well. So that's where we're starting. I don't know that we'll ever get to a full life cycle for other people's equipment. We are working on the full life cycle for our own equipment. We have done full life cycle assessments for all of our own products, and so that does build in, there's 5 pounds of sheet metal, 8 pounds of aluminum, a transformer, an inductor, 9 circuit boards, all of that, the embodied carbon, is in the life cycle assessment, such that at the end we can look at cradle to grave, what is the biggest life cycle stage impact and what is the biggest component impact.